Hey, how you doing? I'm Joe Dallas, and we're wrapping up 2022. I want to talk to you about what I consider to be the five top cancel culture related stories of this past year. And I want to look especially at the takeaway from each of these five stories. Now, cancel culture, uh, as you probably know, it's both a trend and a crusade. It's a trend and it's a crusade. It's a trend towards a very ancient human sin, self righteousness. I mean, absolutely. Cancel culture invokes and expresses a very holier than thou attitude. It's what I would call a form of social puritanism. Whether you call it the woke movement or the social justice movement or cancel culture, it's all based on the idea that a certain group within our society is right, the rest of us are wrong, and the rest of us are in need of reformation. And that's why it's both a trend and a crusade. Yeah, it's a crusade because when you got a crusade, you have a passion to either convert or silence the infidels. Well, in our case, Bible believing Christians are frequently the infidels that are targeted either for conversion or silencing. So, as we're coming into January of 2023, let's first look at the what I consider to be the top five cancel culture stories that relate to this particular crusade. Let's start with number five, Candace Cameron Bure. Candace Cameron Bure, she refuses to back down. I always like that. I like that in anybody. You're probably familiar with her. She's a pretty well known actress. She played DJ Tanner on the series Full House. She was, for a couple of years, a co host on The View. And she has starred in quite a few Hallmark Channel movies. And so for her recurring roles in Hallmark films, she was dubbed the Queen of Christmas Movies. Well, this year, 2022, she decided to leave Hallmark and she began projects with the Great American Family Network. Great American Family Network. Now, in announcing her decision to leave Hallmark, she certainly didn't trash Hallmark. She didn't say, I'm leaving Hallmark because I don't like them anymore. She simply said, and I quote, I knew that the people behind Great American Family were Christians that love the Lord and wanted to promote faith programming and good family entertainment. So she said part of her rationale was she's very comfortable, very sure that the people with Great American Family are operating from a Christian base. Now, as you probably know, Hallmark recently made a decision to add gay characters to the Hallmark Channel movies. And that's created some controversy. But again, Cameron didn't make any reference to that. She was asked, though, about the subject of gay characters or same sex marriage in Hallmark films and whether or not Great American Family would follow Hallmark's lead in that. And she said, quote, in an interview, I think that Great American Family will keep traditional marriage at the core. Whoa, there's the story right there. That got everybody's attention. Up to that point, I suppose it was okay her leaving Hallmark. I suppose it was okay her saying, well, it's a very Christian organization I'm going to, and I like their values and so forth. But once she said traditional marriage, kaboom. Artists, celebrities, leaders erupted back on social media. Oh, the bigot. Oh, the hateful woman. Oh, the exclusionary person. Neil Bledsoe, for example, who was, up to this point, uh, signed on to do films with the Great American Family Network. He said, upon hearing that remark from Cameron, quote, I could never forgive myself for continuing my relationship with a network that actively chooses to exclude the LGBTQIA plus community. So, although he had a film with Great American Family Network to promote, he wouldn't promote it, and he's not going to work with them any longer because of Cameron's remarks. Another actress, Hilary Burton of One Tree Hill, she called Cameron Bure a bigot, and she added, I don't remember Jesus liking hypocrites like Candy, her name for Cameron. But sure, make your money, honey. You ride that prejudice wave all the way to the bank. And one of the judges from So You Think You Can Dance, Jojo Siwa, I believe is the way you pronounce his name, he said, quote, I can't believe that she, Cameron, would not only create a movie with intention of excluding LGBTQIA+, but then also talk about it in the press. This is rude and hateful to a whole community of people. Okay, full disclosure. I don't know who I'm talking about here. I was not familiar with these names, candidly. I really wasn't familiar with Candace Cameron Bure up until recently when all the controversy hit. I still watch Humphrey Bogart movies, so what do I know? But evidently, these are all big names, and I guess here's my point. The reason it's significant to me and should be to you as well. These folks influence the environment. They influence the environment by basically telling the people in our environment that those of us who hold traditional views are, well, you saw it here, rude, hateful, hurtful, exclusionary. That's how you get what I call starred. You know, when the Nazi regime was beefing up its plans to exterminate the Jewish population, they started with a campaign of smearing the reputation of Jewish people and basically denigrating them and creating the image of the dangerous Jewish person, and then starring them, forcing all of them to wear the yellow star, which was a symbol of all the hateful stereotypes that they were making about Jewish people. This is how we get started. People influence the environment to believe that those holding a particular viewpoint are dangerous people, and we create damage, and so we need to be, in one way or another, marginalized. And now, an additional component to that story is if you're connected in any way to such people, you need to speak out against them. So this is why, for example, the actor Neil Bledsoe had said, "I couldn't forgive myself if I continue to work with this network." Why? Because they are associated with someone who I have labeled a bigot. So it's not going to be enough just to star, quote unquote, the people who you deem to be bigots. You're also going to pressure anyone who's associated with them to end that association. Now, in subsequent posts, and this is how this woman won me over, at least, she just openly denied being hateful. She reiterated she was a Christian, loved all people. Let me quote from one of her responses, quote, "It absolutely breaks my heart that anyone would ever think I intentionally would want to offend and hurt anyone. But given the toxic climate in our culture right now, I shouldn't be surprised. We need Christmas more than ever. To those who hate what I value and who are attacking me online, and those who have tried to assassinate my character, to everyone reading this of any race, creed, sexuality, or political party, including those who have tried to bully me with name calling, I love you." See why I like her? She didn't back down. She didn't get hateful. She didn't lower her own standards. I think she represented the Christian position pretty well. So, what's the takeaway? Well, three takeaway points on this. One, you are no longer able to be neutral on these issues. LGBTQ, gender identity, trans, any of the sexual identity controversies, you're going to be pushed to take a position, particularly by the people who are promoting a revision of our understanding of normal sexuality and the definition of marriage. You're no longer going to be able to be neutral in this crusade. Now, this is reminiscent of something Arthur Miller brilliantly wrote about in his play The Crucible, when Judge Hawthorne, who was so zealous to find the witches and burn the witches and purge Salem of the witches and make sure that everybody was on page with him, and he wouldn't allow anybody to be neutral on this, he said, in the middle of his own crusade, "You must understand, sir, that a person is either with this court or he must be counted against it. There is no road between. This is a sharp time now, a precise time. We live no longer in the dusky afternoon when evil mixed itself with good and befuddled the world. Now, by God's grace, the shining sun is up, and them that fear not light will surely praise it." He pretty aptly described the tone and the dangers of the modern cancel culture movement. You're no longer able to be neutral on these issues. You're no longer going to be able to even stay silent on these issues. You will be pressured to take a stand one way or another. Secondly, she did model, and this is a good takeaway, you can hold the traditional view responsibly, as she did. You notice in her responses, she didn't even get into the morality or immorality of homosexuality. She simply said, hey, in a free society, we ought to be able to hold a viewpoint. I am not hateful for holding mine. And she did openly say, I'm a Christian. I believe the Bible. I believe in the traditional definition of marriage. But third takeaway, be prepared for pushback when you do. Okay? If you hold a traditional view, you are going to get a lot of pushback. Be prepared for that. You can hold that view responsibly, as I believe she has up to this point, at least from what I've seen. But don't be surprised when the pushback comes. But the pushback is an indictment against the people who are pushing. It really is. Peter mentioned this in 1 Peter 3:16. He was exhorting believers to basically be living the life in a holy way, in a responsible way, and speaking truth in a bold way, saying, quote, having a good conscience that whereas they speak evil of you as of evildoers, they themselves may be ashamed who falsely accuse your good conversation in Christ. If they're going to accuse you of being a hater, make them lie in order to do it. Yeah. It's fifth top story. Fourth top story is Kirk Cameron. Kirk Cameron says, me too, in 2022. Me too. Uh, Kirk Cameron is, of course, Candace Cameron's brother. And so I got to say, there's some good genes in there. So that boldness and consecration seems to run in the family. Now, you're probably familiar with him both as a television actor and also as a very outspoken Christian spokesperson. Earlier this year, Kirk released a book called As You Grow. It's a children's book. It's ranked very high. It was number one on Amazon sales for quite some time. As You Grow, a children's book. Now, it's a children's book that has nothing to do with, say, sexuality or gender identity or any social justice type issues. It's a story about a sort of a gentle giant of a tree who learns in his process compassion and kindness and patience and self-control. Sounds like pretty innocuous stuff to be teaching kids. So Cameron releases his book and he notices that quite a few libraries across the country have had what they call Drag Queen Story Hour, where they invite drag queens in to read stories to the children. And so he thought, well, me too. I mean, if you're having drag queens come in and offer their storytelling abilities, I'm not telling you not to do that, but I am saying I ought to be able to do the same. Well, 50 of the libraries he contacted disagreed. Most of them outright refused. Some of them just didn't even reply to him at all. Initially, a couple of them, Scarsdale and Indianapolis, refused, and they had hosted Drag Queen Story Hours. So on December 12th, he contacted them asking for the same right. Hey, you allow drag queens to come in and promote their particular ideology and represent their particular ideology. Can I not come in and represent mine, which I believe is very helpful to kids, certainly not harmful? Well, in Providence, Rhode Island, one of the libraries he had contacted, one of those 50s, responded, and I think their response is very telling. On the one hand, they said their libraries aim for diversity and inclusion. We aim for diversity and inclusion. And then they turned around and said specifically, quote, we are a very queer-friendly library. Our messaging does not align. Well, wait a minute. If you aim for diversity and inclusion, then the fact that you're queer friendly should not exclude you from being able to also allow a more traditional viewpoint. And the point is, of course, Cameron was not even promoting a more traditional viewpoint. His book has nothing to do with marriage and sexuality. He had no intention of talking about marriage and sexuality, but only because he is a prominent Christian spokesperson who has said very plainly he does not support the idea of redefining marriage. That alone got him starred, and we mustn't have a starred person speaking to our children. Well, Cameron, in an interview with Fox News, noted the irony of this. He said, quote, as Bibles are literally being removed from schools and libraries, and as Christianity and faith and the Ten Commandments are being taken out of schools and replaced with toxic ideas like transgenderism, critical race theory, and the 1619 Project, I'm going to fight back. Drag Queen Hour is going after the children because everyone understands that whoever controls the textbooks controls the future. Let me repeat that. Everyone understands that whoever controls the textbooks controls the future. Much as I respect Cameron, I'm not sure I agree with that. I agree that whoever controls the textbooks controls the future. I'm not at all sure everyone understands that. I'm really not. I think there would have been more pushback against this type of stuff from the beginning if we did. Well, interestingly enough, a couple of the libraries he had contacted, both Scarsdale and Indiana, they wound up scheduling him. And hey, in Indianapolis, they had a record-setting 2,500 people show up for his reading of his book. Pretty successful, I'd say. Now, what's the takeaway on this? 3 points. First, if you hold the traditional view, you will always be suspected of imposing the traditional view. And this was case in point. This was Exhibit A. Cameron holds a traditional view of marriage. He had no intention of imposing it, but automatically, he's a conservative Christian. If he comes to teach our children about this nice story he's written about a nice tree that learned how to be gentle to all people, that might be well and good, but somewhere in there, he's going to impose his particular viewpoint. So if you hold a traditional viewpoint, you're going to find yourself blocked from having any kind of influence, even if you're not talking about that viewpoint. Why? Because you must be denied credibility if you hold that view. So that's one takeaway. Just get used to it. If you hold the traditional view, people will suspect you of also imposing the traditional view. Secondly, legal rights are legitimate tools. Legal rights are legitimate tools. You remember in Acts 16 when Paul was arrested as a Roman citizen, he was about to get whipped, and he turned around and said, hey, guys, I'm a Roman citizen, and as such, I am exempt from scourging, this form of examination. Now, I appreciate that being included in Luke's account of the early church, because you know what? A lot of Christians, I think, today are feeling like, we mustn't be too much into either politics or standing on our legal rights and so forth. Well, legal rights are legitimate rights. They're legitimate tools. They are legitimate tools for advancing truth that needs to be advanced. So there's nothing wrong with that. Legal rights are legitimate tools. Third takeaway, and by the way, Cameron proved that, didn't he? Because he did say openly, look, I intend to assert my rights legally if I need to. And that's when the libraries finally said, oh, well, okay. So those are legitimate tools to use. Third takeaway, we need some of the David spirit. We need some of that David spirit. Okay, Goliath is out there just, mocking Israel and saying, oh, come on, you bunch of dogs. I can take any of you on. You all afraid of me? And everybody was intimidated. Everyone was intimidated. The cancel culture is quite a Goliath, isn't it? I mean, it bellows. I mean, it tells you, if you cross us, baby, we are going to come after you. And David comes out, this strapping young kid, saying, well, who is this uncircumcised Philistine? We need a little more of that David spirit. We really do. And if we do exercise that David spirit, I mean, on the one hand, the primary reason to do it is to honor truth and thereby to honor God. Whether we win, lose, draw, whatever, we need to be speaking truth as a way of expressing God's truth, who we represent. We're created for his glory, therefore we express his truth. But you know what? It's also true that in temporal terms, there are good results that will come. And so Paul told the Galatians, Galatians 6:9, let us not be weary in well doing. Well, Cameron was not weary in well doing. He had a book, he had a legitimate goal. I would like to have this book read to children. I would like to read to children. You allow other people to do it. I want to be allowed to do it. At first, everybody said no. And a lot of people looking at cancel culture today say, oh, well, don't fight it. Don't make a ruckus. Don't oppose. We'll never win. He just said no. Who's this uncircumcised Philistine telling me that I cannot read my book to children when drag queens, transvestites, bisexuals, homosexuals are allowed to not only read their stories to children, but in many cases actually be involved in what I would call overt indoctrination? So with all of that in mind, hey, let's take heart from what happened. I found that to be an encouraging story. Need some of that David spirit. Story number 3, speaking of a good David spirit, Governor Ron DeSantis. Governor Ron DeSantis says no to trans-activism. No to trans-activism. Okay, March of this year, DeSantis signed into law the Parental Rights Education Bill in Florida. This very controversial bill said, and I quote, classroom instruction by school personnel or third parties on sexual orientation or gender identity may not occur in kindergarten through grade 3. Kindergarten through grade 3. He wasn't even saying it can't be done in the school. He's just saying, let's not start in kindergarten, okay? Let's at least give the kids a few years of innocence, like maybe up to grade 3, or in a manner that is not age appropriate or developmentally appropriate for students in accordance with state standards. Now, to me, I almost want to yawn reading that. Oh, yeah, that's really radical. You don't want to talk to 4, 5, and 6-year-olds about sex change reassignment and homosexuality and bisexuality and gender identity disorders. Gee whiz. Yeah, well, that was controversial. Right off the bat, everybody and their brother, at least everybody who had social influence, celebrities and journalists and leaders in all quarters, they dubbed this the Don't Say Gay bill. Governor DeSantis has passed a bill in Florida whereby in the public school system you can't say gay. which was nonsense. I mean, just a blatantly dishonest thing. In no way did he say anybody couldn't say gay. He did say official classroom instruction by a teacher or a third party may not include. That means the instruction materials, the textbooks, the workbooks, the assignments, what have you, may not be about sexual orientation or gender identity issues. Has nothing to do with not being able to say gay. And everybody picked that up. You know how bumper sticker sayings are. People catch on to them without examining whether or not they're true. So this was a good case in point. Don't say gay. Oh, it's a don't say gay bill. Well, that's a terrible thing. So, Disney Corporation spoke out against it, and jokes were made about it at the Oscars, for heaven's sake. And DeSantis, God bless him, he said, and I quote, "I don't care what Hollywood says. I don't care what big corporations say. Here I stand. I am not backing down." He behaved himself like a gentleman, but I got to say, like a gentleman, you probably wouldn't want to mess with, at least in the sense that he's assertive. He's coming across with an attitude which I believe was balanced and godly. And that bill went into effect in July. I should say it was presented in March, and then it went into effect in July of this year. Okay, what's the takeaway? A couple of points. One, real important, don't underestimate the spiritual dynamics in all of this. Don't understand the spiritual dynamics. Why was there such immediate pushback at the very idea that you can't talk about sexual and gender identity matters with little kids? Kindergarten, first grade, second grade, third grade. Why would there be such a vehement pushback? And how could that pushback have so much influence that, the great irony of irony, Disney Corporation, Disney, which was originally all about kids and family, even they are saying, oh, that's terrible that we can't talk about homosexuality and transsexualism to our little children. Why? Well, spiritual dynamics. I mean, look, if Satan has influence in the world, and he does, and he has authority in the world, largely, which he does, then of course the world is going to largely hate what he hates. What does he hate? The family, life, normal union, everything that God has created and called good. Satan says, I hate that. So don't underestimate the spiritual dynamics behind this. How else, seriously, can you account for the absolutely astonishing success of the transgender movement over the last few years? I mean, good heavens, it makes the progress of the gay rights movement look like a snail's pace crawling. The transgender movement just zip. Amazing amount of power and influence that it's attained so quickly, and the public has largely bought into it, either bought into it or been intimidated by it. So don't underestimate the spiritual dynamics behind this. They are strong. We are not against transgender people. We are against the spirit, I will say it, dark, evil, deceptive spirit, which tries to get people to mutilate themselves and become something they are not and generate general confusion about something as basic as the male-female identity and the male-female union. Don't underestimate those spiritual dynamics. But second takeaway, don't cave into them either. Do not cave into the spiritual dynamics, as DeSantis did not. I think there's a good example of one of those stories we could say, go thou and do likewise, okay? Holy boldness, behaved like a gentleman, stuck to his guns, was articulate, clear, and spot on. Why? Because John said, 1 John 4:4, greater is he that is in you than he that is in the world. Story number four, Elon Musk. That'll always start a good conversation. Elon Musk takes over Twitter. Back in April of this year, he initiated acquisition of Twitter. He completed that acquisition in October. And of course, since then, he's discovered a lot of shadow banning and a lot of censorship and a lot of political bias on the part of Twitter that he is taking care of, trying to correct. He's very committed to broader freedoms on the platform. Now, Mr. Musk does not openly identify as Christian. I've read different quotes from him where he certainly considered the claims of Jesus and admires very much about Christianity. But at this point, I see no reason to consider him, quote unquote, a believer. But he does value principles that I do find very biblical, including fairness, open dialogue, exchange of ideas, mutual respect. So what happened there? Why is this a major story? Because it's a blow for freedom of speech, and it's the proof of cancel culture's goal to remove freedom of speech. It's both. It's a blow for freedom of speech, which we of all people should champion. Why? Our commission, and let's not underestimate this, our commission as believers is largely about speech. Preach the gospel to all nations. Make disciples. You can't do that if you can't talk, if you can't communicate. You can't fulfill the Great Commission. No wonder then there's such a move orchestrated by the prince of the power of the air to remove that very freedom by which the gospel can be preached. So it's a blow for freedom of speech, but it's also a proof of the goal of cancel culture to remove it. So what's the takeaway in all of that? Number one, persecution is not limited to Christians. No, it's not. Uh, Persecution will be aimed at anybody who espouses principles that are Christian in nature, even if the person himself or herself is not a Christian. Let's not kid ourselves about this. Cancel culture cannot succeed where there's freedom of speech. Cancel culture cannot succeed where there's freedom of speech. Cancel culture is at essence unreasonable. Where there's freedom of speech, people can reason with each other. Where people can reason with each other, they're not going to buy into, by and large, the claims and the values of cancel culture. So cancel culture can't exist where there's freedom of speech. To the cancel culture, to the people who promote it, to the social justice movement, to the woke movement, they all have this in common. Liberty is dangerous, control is essential. Liberty is dangerous to this movement, which is why this movement is about removing liberty. Control is essential. They lie when they say it's about safety. That's a bald-faced lie. It is not about safety. It is about control. Thereby, anyone defending free speech or fairness is going to get pushback from cancel culture. Persecution then is not limited to Christians. Second takeaway, God's instrument may not be a godly person. It happens. I believe personally that God has used Elon Musk. I'm not advocating for everything he believes. I'm not saying he's Saint Elon. He's not. But yes, I think he did a very brave thing. And who knows, whatever motives he may have had or may not have had, what do I know? God will judge that. All I know is I like the fact that a man stood up for freedom of speech and didn't just speak out for freedom of speech. He had the means with which to do something about it. With his billions laying around, he had a little discretionary income. He could say, well, I think I'll buy Twitter. So God's instrument is not necessarily going to be a godly person. King Cyrus was a good example, helped the Jews returned from exile in Babylon. And this is why Paul said, 1 Timothy 2:2, first I exhort that prayers be made everywhere for kings and for all that are in authority, that we may lead a quiet and peaceable life in all godliness and honesty. Why do we pray for people in authority? Well, I mean, we should pray for anybody, but we especially pray for them because, as Paul said, we pray that they will be given the wisdom, that they will be given the heart and the guidance to allow us to live our lives peaceably in godliness and in honesty, which means in many cases, pray for leaders who will leave us alone. Pray for leaders who will not try to intrude on us, which government is not meant to do. Which leads finally to what I believe is the top takeaway story, or I should say the top cancel culture story of 2022. Supreme Court justices being threatened after the decision they made regarding Roe v. Wade. That was huge. That was a huge cancel culture related story. June 24th, as you know, the Supreme Court overturned Roe v. Wade. Now, that did not criminalize abortion. It simply said that the states, rather than the federal government, would make the decision whether or not abortion would be allowed. It returned the decision to the states. Of course, that was landmark. That was huge. You know what? I still can't believe it happened. I mean, I believe it, but emotionally, I'm still catching up to the fact that, wow, 50 plus years, I didn't think it was going to happen. But there it is. And so the story itself is encouraging that Roe v. Wade was overturned. Sure it is. It's not the end of abortion, I know, but yeah, I'm very glad that happened. But the cancel culture aspect of the story is chilling. In May, the Department of Homeland Security released a memo saying, quote, they're talking about threats now that were being made against people who supported any overturning of Roe v. Wade before the decision was even made. The Department of Homeland Security released a memo saying, quote, some of these threats discussed burning down or storming the U.S. Supreme Court and murdering justices and their clerks, members of Congress, or lawful demonstrators. The DHS was reporting on threats being made against anyone who supported the overturning of Roe v. Wade, and those threats included, well, threats of burning down or storming the U.S. Supreme Court. People make a big deal out of January 6th. For heaven's sake, look at this. Murdering justices and their clerks. Wow. Murdering members of Congress or lawful demonstrators. 2020, as you remember, saw an escalation of violence justified in the name of moral crusade when George Floyd died after being arrested and allegedly, and I would say not only just allegedly, probably abused by an officer, but I'm not completely certain about what did or didn't happen. There are some conflicting accounts of it, but here's the bottom line. That was a green light for everybody to basically lose their minds. Let's go out, let's raise hell, let's burn down cities, let's vandalize property, let's terrorize people, all in the name of a moral crusade. So the takeaway, well, from all of these stories is really this. These issues are life and death issues. Abortion, sexuality, transgender, racial justice, unity. These are life and death issues. God knows that. Go back to the Genesis account and you see God creating the male-female union, the family dynamic, the ability to procreate, the sanctioning of life. God is also the author of diversity. Absolutely, he is. Including diverse races who he never meant to be turning against each other. So God knows that these issues are life and death issues. Satan also knows these issues are life and death issues. Interesting point about that. When Satan seduced Eve, the whole idea was, let's mess up this picture. I hate this picture. I hate God, so I hate whatever God loves. God painted this picture. I am going to mar that picture. And he did, didn't he? The human experience has never been, since the fall of Adam and Eve and the fall of all mankind afterwards, the human experience has never been what God intended it to be. Now, when God redeems humans, our souls are redeemed, and then there is a redemptive influence we should be having on the very environment. That's the last thing the devil wants. So God knows these issues are life and death. Satan knows these issues are life and death. And the people of the world knows these issues are life and death. Why? Because they walk according to the course of the world, as Paul said in Ephesians 2:2. In times past, as non-believers, you walked according to a certain course, a certain direction. That's the direction the world is going. And he said that course is largely under the power of the prince of the power of the air, the spirit that now works in the children of disobedience. So what's happening here? God knows these issues are important. Satan knows these issues are important. People of the world know these issues are important. And God's people, I hope we do. I pray we do. But I'm not sure we do. It's relevant to note something Jesus pointed out in Matthew 16:2-3, when he said, basically, guys, wake up. When it is evening, you say it'll be fair weather, for the sky is red. And in the morning, you say it'll be foul weather, for the sky is red and lowering. Oh, you hypocrites, you can discern the face of the sky, but you cannot discern the signs of the times. That, to me, is the takeaway of the top cancel culture stories of 2022. The wake-up call to us, the body of Christ. Well, if you haven't yet subscribed to this podcast, won't you please consider doing that? Just hit that button and let me know you subscribed. I'd like to thank you personally for that. Also, if you've not yet picked up a copy of the book this podcast is based on, as we go into 2023, we want to be equipped to dialogue reasonably, biblically, clearly about these issues. Christians in a Cancel Culture was written with that in mind. It includes tools that you can use, sample dialogues, talking points to use on the issue of homosexuality, transgender, racism, abortion, and progressive Christianity. And if you would like to support this ministry with a year-end gift so we can go on providing free content, just go to joedallas.com/giving, joedallas.com/giving to partner with us with a year-end gift. You've still got time to make that so that we can continue not only providing this content, but creating new content as well. Well, we're here every Friday, Christians in a Cancel Culture. And I'll be seeing you next Friday. In the meantime, let's keep in mind the job description Paul gave to Timothy for anyone who wants to say, I am a servant of the Lord. Well, if that's what you want, here's what you got to do. The servant of the Lord must not strive, but be gentle to all, apt to teach, patient, in meekness instructing those who oppose themselves, if perhaps God will grant them repentance according to the knowledge of the truth. 2 Timothy 2:24-25. Hey, let's keep that in mind, okay? When it comes to the truth, remember, it's not just where you stand. It's also how you stand. Happy New Year. Good seeing you. God bless you.